It'll take a while to repair the damage to Via Union City Hall. The memories of what happened here will last much longer. On Saturday afternoon, a convoy of vehicles covered in the initials of a local drug cartel, CDN, drove into town and began firing. This, the authorities believe, was sending a message to the regional government in Coahuila. Security forces surrounded the town 60 kilometres south of the Texas border. By the time the gun battles ended on Sunday, 22 were dead. 16 gunmen, 4 police officers, 2 civilians. Pictures of local politicians were riddled with bullets. Locals had to literally run for their lives.
We were arriving at the plaza with our children when they began to shoot at us from the hill, and we had to run in another direction.
The attack in Coahuila ended on the day it's now been confirmed was the deadliest since Mexico began keeping records. 127 people were killed on December 1st, the day that marked the first anniversary of President Manuel Lopez Obrador taking office. He had promised a new approach to tackling Mexico's violence, and at his morning news conference claimed the incident in Coahuila was unusual.
This case is, let's say, unusual. It is not something that happens in Coahuila every day. We have a plan for the National Guard. We need 140,000 guards, but we only have 70,000.
Later in the day, the president met members of the Lebaran family. 9 of them were killed in a cartel ambush near the US border in early November. They were updated on the investigation into the murders. 4 people have been arrested who didn't speak after the meeting. Thousands took to the street on Sunday to protest against the president's first year in office, one of the largest groups, demanding he do more to curb the violence. US President Donald Trump says he's begun the process to designate Mexico's drug cartels as terrorist organizations. Mexico opposes that idea, but it may find itself under increasing pressure to do something about the murder rate, especially if there's another day as bloody as December the 1st, 2019. Alan Fisher, Aljazeera, Mexico City.
Well, Madeleine Penman is a regional researcher for the Americas at Amnesty International and joins us now from Mexico City via Skype. Good to have you with us on the programme, Madeleine. First of all, these numbers are fairly difficult for many of our viewers to comprehend. Just what are the reasons behind this surge in the homicide rate in Mexico?
Well, contrary to what López Obrador has promised as a president in terms of moving away from the military strategy that we've seen for over a decade in Mexico, in fact, the reality is that his presidency has not moved away from militarization, and we see more army and military on the streets than we ever have before in Mexico. And studies have actually shown that this approach with a frontal combat to tackling organized crime, in fact, is related to an increase in violence. So the National Guard that López Obrador created with his new presidency is, in fact, the army and the navy cloaked in a so-called civilian disguise, but in fact remains the same forces, the same army training, and the army and the navy in Mexico have been shown to use excessive force, and this is related to these warlike tactics on both sides of this problem. And so we're seeing that that's related to an increase in the violence.
So you're saying that excessive force is the reason why there are so many homicides on Mexico streets, and this is why because over 120 people killed in one day. It seems astonishing, and it's down to the current policy of the Mexican government?
Well, we've seen since 2007 that each year violence has increased in Mexico. So we're into the second decade of a war on drugs. And the authorities in Mexico generally have a policy of take no prisoners. And in this sense, normal rule of law institutions using the justice system to ensure that crimes are properly investigated, those responsible are brought to account. These sorts of mechanisms are not being relied on. And so therefore, sort of an all-out eye for eye, tooth for tooth kind of war is going on between authorities and drug cartels. And unfortunately, we've seen that this has only increased in escalation of violence and an increase in the loss of human lives. And many times we've seen that this has resulted with crossfire, with people being apparently presented as criminals that are not criminals, with the use of torture to extract false confessions, and with enforced disappearances as well. There are more than 40,000 people disappeared in Mexico, many of those at the hands or with the acquiescence of authorities. So unfortunately, what we're seeing is an institutional failure in Mexico, where normal rule of law mechanisms are just simply not working. And López Obrador's presidency has so far shown no results in this regard, even though it purports to change things.
So where does the solution lie then? Does the president wants to bring in this policy of hugs, not bullets? Are you saying he's not hugging enough?
Well, actually, what is missing is a thorough strategy to strengthen policing institutions. So right now, Mexico has been relying for over a decade on the army and the navy, who are not trained to do normal civilian policing functions. Unfortunately, what the López Obrador presidency did was extinguish the federal police. They have very little plans to strengthen the capabilities of policing institutions. And so we're relying on institutions that are trained really to be in warlike situations and not trained to protect civilians. So this is a key issue. The other solution is tackling inequality, which is a huge driver of violence and a huge driver of young people going into the ranks of organized crime. However, López Obrador has put in place programs this year and has increased the minimum wage, which we hope will have some effect in terms of tackling those root causes.
OK, Madeleine Penman, live there from Mexico City. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts.
Thank you.